All right, so I need to ask you today, what do you wonder? What do you wonder? There are a lot of things that cause us to wonder, and often they have to do with the fact that we have a framework that has been developed about what we believed or what we thought or how life worked, and then something doesn't work, something doesn't fit into that framework, and it causes us to wonder, right? We wonder because the frame reference that we have does not provide all of the answers that we feel we need. As we change in life, as we get more experience, as we get educated, some of the mysteries of things that we wondered about are resolved. And as a result of that, our frame reference changes, and it leads us to wonder about new things that we never thought to wonder about before, right? What do you wonder about today? And specifically, as we're going through this series, I want to challenge, because throughout your life, there are going to be kind of a pulling and a tugging at your faith, and you're going to find yourself looking towards deconversion or moving away from things that you were learned and grew up with that are not fitting today. And so if you find yourself a little challenged by life circumstances, this is the series for you. This is where you want to be this particular month. Now, some of you that loved science may remember that when you grew up, we were taught what used to be a part of science teaching was scientists taught a steady state theory of the universe. A steady state theory of the universe. Now, how many of you are really excited about the steady state? Yes, so excited. I can tell. A lot of scientists here, right? And what that basically said was that matter always existed. No one really knows where it comes from. No one really knows, how it got here, but it just always was. But still, scientists, even though they have this theory, wondered. And one of the reasons that they wondered was because mathematics proved that you cannot have an infinite actual. And so that caused them to wonder, you can't have an infinite number of actual things. And so scientists began to wonder, how could matter just always have been? And so they understood that you could have mathematically an infinite potential, but you cannot have an infinite actual. Along about 1929 came someone that some of you will remember his name, and that was Edwin Hubble. And he was looking up at the stars through powerful, magnification and these, telescopes and looking at the stars and spending time, charting and seeing what was going on in the universe. And it was his discovery. Mr. Hubble observed that the galaxies were speeding away at an incredible rate. And it was that brought about kind of a reframing of perspective for science. The scientific community realized that if these galaxies were speeding away from each other, if they charted them back, that they would come back together. If they ran everything backwards, they could see them all coming back together, the galaxies, and forming what they called a singularity. Now, how many of you are really excited about science now, right? And so the discovery disrupted the framework of scientific community and brought about new wonder. If it all was here, and now it's all here, how did it happen? And so scientific community began to wonder. It was 1931 that Edwin Hubble took Albert Einstein to Mount Wilson's observatory to see it for himself. And he observed it, and they looked at it, and from that point, the scientific community changed the framework for viewing the universe in what you and I know today, and were probably taught as we were growing up, as the Big Bang Theory. Aren't you glad you came to church today? Yes, you can go out and say, I don't even need to go to science class this week. I already know about the Big Bang. And still, scientists wondered. But suddenly there's a brand new frame of reference for them to wonder through. You see, the truth that we come to grips with about our frame of reference is this, that we all have a framework that helps us make sense of life. And it helps us make decisions that make sense for us. Everybody that's here today has a framework that you've put together. And we all have a framework or a frame of reference, if you will, that helps us know right from wrong, what's just from unjust. This frame of reference for you and I, it teaches us, it helps us to know what we believe. And then hopefully out of what we believe, how we will behave. And even what we will hope for based on how we understand and view the world. And in all honesty, we didn't build this framework all by ourselves, did we? This framework for most of us was shaped for us. We were kind of born into it and taught it growing up. We were shaped by the family that we grew up in. Our framework was shaped by the community of influencers that we looked up to. Some people really looked up to teachers and professors and they admired them so much and looked up to them that they allowed those individuals to help shape their frame of reference and teach them what they should believe or what they should think about the world and the universe and life. We were shaped by what happened to us, experiences that happened to us. We grew up thinking that, life worked this way, and then something happens, a crisis, a difficult situation, a challenge, a question that we can't answer. And we change our framework because they say, you know what, we were taught it works that way, but it really doesn't work that way. I've lived it, I've experienced it, and it does not work that way. And so we are about reframing. And it also is shaped for us by things that we have seen and witnessed with our own eyes, touched, tasted. And so our framework is constantly kind of developing and reshaping as you and I are growing our worldview. We're adding new things in, taking some old things out. Some of us were shaped in our framework by religion. And it may not have been necessarily all just Christian, but more about just the good things that we do as those who go to church, religious practices. And it might have been like, we go to church. Why do we go to church? Because we're religious. And so some of the way that we view life has to do with that upbringing. Some were kind of moralistic. You may remember, those of us who are a little older, I would call it like the Andy Griffith raising, there was a moral after every story, right? I mean, every one of those episodes of Andy Griffith, when they were over with, you could tell what the moral was. It was basically treat your neighbor kindly, because one day you're going to want your neighbor to treat you kindly. So sometimes, we were raised with that kind of a moralistic sense of worldview. Those of you who maybe were raised kind of religious, where, it's Christmas and Easter and, some of the stories and things that were going on, but, really we're not too deeply into it. It's just, there's a Bible that it's a family Bible. People have written their names on it. It's got a lot of dust on it. Really never opened it, but it sits on the coffee table, and that's kind of like, that's what we are. There's a cross that hangs on the wall. And we were raised that way. Maybe some of us were raised opportunistic, where, opportunity was how we made decisions, and we didn't really think about the moral consequences of those things. It was just, there's an opportunity. Let's seize that opportunity. Let's move towards that and in that direction. Others maybe academically, where we were raised to understand that there's high priority to get through school and to learn, but not only that, but to get great grades, to get A's, and we were, to hang out with those people who are big thinkers and read books and learn and grow academically. And maybe others were karma, for every kick there's a kickback, and this is happening to you because of what you did or what you didn't do or what you should have done. And then there were others that may be scientific, that life, if you cannot do it, reproduce it in the lab, it doesn't exist. You can't taste it, smell it, and see it. It doesn't exist. The story about the professor says, there's no God because we can't see God, we can't taste God, we can't touch God, therefore there is no God. Student raised his hand and said, the professor has no brain because we can't see his brain, we can't touch his brain, we can't taste his brain, the professor has no brain. Right? Some of us, though, were raised scientific, and if it can't be reproduced in the lab, then, that's just not true. And then fatalist, some of us were raised that it's just a fate in life. That's just the way things go. Some people get good breaks, and some people get bad breaks, and that's just the way things happen. And so all of this has to do with how we will shape and view our world. And for many of us over time, we've abandoned parts of our belief and our framework. We've thrown it out over time. And the reason that we've abandoned it is because what happened around us or what happened in us no longer fits in the framework, and it doesn't make sense for us anymore. Now, when life doesn't add up for us and it doesn't fit into our framework, what tends to happen to us, and this is the danger for deconversion, and what tends to happen is that if we begin to wonder, we start to wander, right? I've been trying to practice saying these words because they sound a lot alike, right? When we begin to wondering, then we start wandering, right? And kind of like drifting away. And this is where people start spiritual journeys. The one I grew up with didn't work. I tossed things out, and now I'm on a spiritual journey. I'm trying to find truth. In wandering, we are attempting to build a new framework that we think will work better than the one that we grew up with, the one that we experienced, the one that we had up to this point in our life. And we feel, as we begin to engage in this process, so much smarter than the people who shaped our framework that we were growing up. I remember thinking, how out of touch and not modern my parents were in their thinking and stuff. And then, you go to college and you have to start washing your clothes and paying bills and doing all the things that you didn't have to do at your home. And I thought, my parents were pretty smart. All of a sudden they got brilliant as I began to experience life, right? But we think at some points in our life that everybody who helped shape our worldview was probably not as bright as we initially thought they were. And we are so much smarter than the religious community that we grew up with, and that is often the time that wandering begins, because wonder leads to wandering. It leads to us drifting away. Now, through this message today, what I hope to do is to invite you, each one of you, to reframe your life around Jesus, to make him the central part and the focal point of your life. I have never talked to anyone, and I'm always amazed by deconversion stories. Growing up a pastor's kid, I was friends with pastors' kids, and a handful of them that over the years have deconverted, who've left the faith. But every time I have conversations with people who have deconverted and left the faith and walked away, it's never because of Jesus. It's never because of Jesus. What happened was they fixed their eyes on something other than Jesus. Now, because I've done this for so long in ministry, I've anticipated your questions, right? I know what you're saying right now. And part of it is, I can't get into that. I can't get into this Jesus thing, Christianity. I can't go down that pathway. Or you have friends that maybe they think they can't go down that pathway. And the primary reason is that you're going to ask me to give up my mind. I'm going to lose the ability to reason and to have experiences and base my life on the things that I know, I see, I taste, and I feel. You're going to ask me to have faith in faith. And I just come too far in life. I cannot have faith in faith. I can't just blindly walk away and close my eyes to things that have happened in my life and just jump in the boat and sail off to some religious kind of experience. Well, I've got really good news for you today. Really, really good news. Christianity never requires you to surrender reason, experience, or never ask you to have faith in faith. It never did, and it never will. But there is a cost. Oh, I knew it. The hook is coming. And here is the cost: your freedom. It's going to cost you your freedom. You will need to learn to say no to you and yes to God. And believe me, that's harder than it sounds as I'm saying it right now. You're going to need to learn to say no to you and yes to Jesus. But before you say, hey, I'm out, man, can't do that. Yeah, it's too hard. Let's get really brutally honest today. The framework that you've been working off of and using has flaws. And I want to submit to you that you are a big part of that flaw. And that there are things that have happened in your life that you have participated in, as I'm talking to you right now, that you're ashamed of. That fit somehow into your framework, shoved over into the corner somewhere, and it doesn't feel or seem like that was right. And so the question is, how brilliant are we anyway? If science is changing its framework based on new information that's coming in and literally coming in every day, every year, every decade, learning more and more about our universe, are we standing here and saying in our pride nature that I'm right no matter what, and my framework, I don't care what other people's framework is, mine is perfect and I'm right, and there's no need for me to make any changes? If that's where you are, then I submit to you that you're the problem. You're standing in your own way of finding what God has for your life. There are fatal flaws in our framework, and the fatalist of them all is us. What do we know after all? Science is changing its mind. Our way of interpreting the world is limited, right? One of the things they used to ask us early students that were, kind of in an apologetics kind of a deal. If you ever want to do this with your friends, it's a lot of fun. Just take and on a white piece of paper, just draw a big circle. Somebody says, I'm an atheist, I don't believe that there is God. So just draw a big circle and just say, this is the circle that represents all the knowledge of the universe. This is it. Can you color in the segment of this circle that you have mastered? What part of this are you the master of the universe? Just sketch it in. Now, if they're very prideful, they'll color most of it in for you. But even if there's a little pie section that's, if they're humble, they might make a dot in that circle, right? I don't even know if I could make something that would be legible to let you know how much I know about the universe. But if they are prideful, they've filled the thing in, but one little segment, and you could say, is it possible that God could exist here where you don't know, where your limits have run out, where you have extended all of your knowledge? Well, I don't know, maybe. Okay, well, guess what? You're not an atheist, you're an agnostic. You've just said, I don't know God, not there is no God. And it changes everything. Our way of interpreting the world is limited. And here is the difference for Christians. Christians believe this about worldview and world perspective. If I had a giant frame up here, a window frame, and I'm looking out it, and that's my world perspective, and I'm holding on to it, and I'm looking at all of you through my worldview. Here's what Christians believe about our worldview. They believe and know that God came himself. He didn't send an oracle, a particular word, a forerunner, an angel. God came himself and stood on our side of the frame to help us see the world, to help us see ourselves, to help us see his purpose and his plan for our lives. God himself became our point of reference. We read these passages a moment ago, Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14. Therefore, since you have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith that we profess. Through Jesus, God did something in the world but he did something for the world. Generations have hung on to faith, to the promise that the Messiah is coming back, that God would show up and would dwell among His creation. And the writer of Hebrews is telling those people who are living in that day, you've seen it, you've experienced it, He's walked among us. He came to your side of the frame. He came so that you could see things more clearly. He's telling them you are on the fulfillment side of things that everybody was hoping for, praying for, and waiting for, that the Jewish nation, all the things that they have gone through, the dispersion of Jews all over to the nations of the world, all of the suffering, all of the agonizing, all of the crying out, God sends your Messiah now, the fullness of time has come, you have seen it, God has come to your side of the frame, He's come to show you. He's come to reveal Himself. He's come to point the way to life. That means that you can hold firmly to the faith that you profess. Your framework is forever changed as you hold firm to what you have in Jesus. It goes on to say in chapter 12, verse 1, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles us. If we're honest, as we said a moment ago, we've thrown out the baby with the bathwater when we were working on our framework, and we got angry because things didn't all add up. And so some of the things that we learned early in life were true, and we should have kept them in our framework, but we threw them out along with everything else and decided to go on a great spiritual journey to traverse through things that were unknown to us and to try to find something else other than what our faith was. There are parts of our faith framework that we knew that worked, but it would not allow us to say yes to something that we wanted to do or be. And so we got in the way of our walk with God because we were the problem. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. I'm always struck when I read these words that there's a frame of reference that's marked out for us in our walk with God. And this framework is not a philosophy. It's not a religion. It's not a high-minded thoughts or self-help tips from a guru of some kind. This framework is the person Jesus. He says in verse 2, fixing our eyes on Jesus. Any religious experience that you've had in life that has focused you on something other than the person and the work of Jesus Christ is not Christianity and will make you wander and wander. If you put your faith or confidence in a religious leader, if you have put your faith or confidence in a set of special books that are self-help to get us better and on the pathway to success in 2018, if you have put your faith or confidence on a set of behaviors, a formula, a big idea of some kind that's going to help reshape things for you on an achievement, you've taken your eyes off Jesus and you're trying to build your own framework. And the author says here, the pioneer, calls Jesus the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith. The pioneer and the perfecter of our faith. Jesus is the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith. You hear this language throughout Scripture. The author and the finisher. The pioneer and the perfecter. Jesus. Fix your eyes on Him. See Jesus. As we begin 52 hours with God, fix your eyes on Jesus. And the last part of that passage in Hebrews chapter 12. Fix your eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before Him, He endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider Him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Here's where we've arrived today on our journey. I want to ask you this question, and if you have left your faith, or if you've thought about leaving your faith, or if there were disciplines in your life that you practiced earlier that you've pushed aside because you don't think they work anymore, they're not relevant to today, then this is a question for you, and I want to ask each one of us to do some self-examination. What was your faith? What is your faith that you lost? What was it fixed on and fastened to when it came into question? Every person that I've talked to who says they've deconverted, they were not fixed on Jesus and fastened to Jesus. I grew up a pastor's kid. I saw some things in the church that were beautiful, and I saw some things that were ugly. There's some pastor kids that couldn't make that journey. The ugly things that happened inside the church that didn't line up with, hey, everybody loves Jesus and everybody serves God and this is the way a Christian lives. And when they saw other than that, it hurt them and they moved away. But every one of them that I've talked to didn't have their eyes fixed on Jesus. What has kept me, and what has kept many of you for years walking firmly in faith and standing solid on the ground is your attention has been fixed on Jesus. And whenever something didn't seem like there was a question you couldn't answer or something else didn't happen, you invited the presence of Jesus into your circumstance. And it was Jesus coming into our circumstance that the song used to say, I don't need to understand, I just need to hold your hand. Jake talked about it a moment ago. We don't know the why sometimes. We don't see it all. There are philosophical, theological things that we could talk about this morning when we see difficult things happen to good people. But the bottom line is, if we stay fixed on Jesus and invite His presence in, we make the journey with Him. And as Christians, we see that life is not just about this moment, but it is about eternity, and we have a broader perspective. We're not only looking into the minute-by-minute things that are happening right now, but we're looking ahead to the promises of God, which He's been faithful to fulfill, that we are going to be reunited around the throne with Him and with all the ones we love and care about, that love Him and call Him their Lord and leader. Our opportunity today at the beginning here is to get our eyes fixed on Jesus, to make Him central to our lives. I'm talking this morning to those who may have had some challenging experiences that have stretched and pulled at your faith. And you are considering and wondering and considering wandering. It's been discouraging. You don't feel like you have an answer. In some cases, it might be, I can't get the job, the career field that I believe I want, need to help support my family, take care of them. It might be a big crisis question of some kind, a big why. Is this happening to me right now, to us? What have we done? What did we not do? And it's pulling and it's stretching at you, and I want you to fix your eyes on Jesus. I want you to invite Him into your circumstances. It will change your perspective. I want to invite our prayer team to come forward. If you want prayer this morning, we're going to stand here and we'll be available to you. I want to invite everyone to stand with me as we sing this worship song. If you need prayer, if you want someone to agree with you this morning, our prayer team stands here ready to pray with you and to encourage you. Let's get our eyes fixed on Him.